what happens with Bradley Beal? Because he's going to opt out, but he's going to opt out because he's going to opt back in and sign this giant contract with Washington. Joe House was on here last week talking about how he thought it was absolutely ludicrous that Bradley Beal would get a supermax. And I went through some of his numbers and became increasingly alarmed, especially when you consider the Washington history. We've seen this happen before where the teams, we just look at it and go, well, they got to sign him. What else are they going to do? And I guess my question is, I do think there's some other things they could do. Bradley Beal is going to be 29 in 2 days. He's 3 All-Star games in his career. He's made 1 All-NBA team, 3rd team. Probably peaked 2 to 3 years ago. He dropped off a little last year. I don't think he's somebody who's necessarily going to get better. So to me, he seems like he's moved into this Ray Allen 2007 stage where maybe not as valuable as like the general public would think. All of a sudden, he's getting traded for Jeff Green and Delonte West, basically. And it's like, wow, that's all Ray Allen is like, yeah, that's all he's worth because people think he peaked maybe 2-3 years ago.
Ray also had the ankle stuff that he was going through too. Like when he got to Boston, he actually was healthier. So I think that worked against him a little bit too, but keep going.
Fair point. So Beal's been in the league 10 years. And my question is, if you're giving him the Supermax, where the hell are you going? And the Wizards with the contract history they have, which we'll get into, is there any scenario where they go, well, wait a second, why do we have to spend all this money on Bradley Beal?
This is really like one of those things where you try to explain it to somebody who doesn't like follow it that closely. Like this is like a relative deal or something or a buddy. And you're like, no, this is kind of what they have to do. And then you think the person who doesn't know anything about it is wrong. And when they might actually be right. Like I remember the Joe Johnson one with Atlanta. I just was like, oh, well, they have to do it. They have to do it. And then I was like, do they though? And I know that I've conditioned myself to, it's really hard to get players. You have to pay guys more than you want to. You end up, the problem is when you're a team and you're playing like, you're paying your 3rd tier guy the same as a 1st tier guy. So it's like, well, how are we spending our $40 million a year? Oh, well, we have a guy that's in the top 10. This guy's not even maybe in the top 20. So like, I've always liked Beal. He's really talented, but I'm with you a bit on this one, being like, wait, why do we have to do this? Because he's going to opt out. This is what I'd heard for over a year was that he was going to do this, get the 250 and then worry about it later. Because not only is he going to get the 250 million, there's no guarantee that. Right. Well, you're right. Maybe they could say, hey, do we not have to give you every last dollar in this thing? But I guess the part of it would be, are you just making it worse for your organization knowing now that he has the deal? Now he can just do whatever he wants and move on. Because I do think that there's a version of him where maybe he's a little overrated. It's like, well, if we get Bradley Beal in and he's your one, what does that really mean? And it hasn't really meant much, has it?
Well, when he's going to be really overrated is when he has a $250 million contract extension. That will immediately become one of the worst 7 or 8 contracts in the league. Again, no shade at Bradley Beal. It's just when you're paying, Jimmy Butler's going to be making that kind of money. And he just almost took somebody to the finals. And that's expensive for him. It's expensive for anybody. You don't really have a lot of roster movement possibilities when you're paying somebody $50 million a year. And the thing is, like, I was looking back at some of the extensions that we decided after the fact. We're like, wow, that one was bad. And this goes back to the 90s, and it goes back to like when Juwan Howard was, 7 for 105. Gilbert, 6 for 111, coming off a knee injury. Francis, 6 for 84 during that stretch when just all those guys, Marbury, Francis, all those dudes were getting at least 6. Penny got 7 for 87. Allen Houston, 6 for 100. Brandon Roy, 5 for 82. Rashard Lewis, 6 for 118. Then we move into this decade. It's in that Chandler Parsons. The years are shorter sometimes, but it's like that Chandler Parsons, 4 for 94. Evan Turner, 4 for 72. Those kind of things.
The Evan Turner one, I remember being like, what?
But the 2 worst ones from the last few years were Wall and Westbrook. Wall got 4 for 177. Seemed logical. He had taken them, almost to round 3 in 2018. And then Westbrook, nobody batted an eyelash when he got that. I think the hardcore basketball people are like, oof, that's a lot for somebody who's got a lot of miles on him. But nobody was like, that's ridiculous. I guess my question is, the recurring theme over and over again is, it's fine to pay the money for the awesome guy, the A-lister, But you start getting in trouble when it's like the all-star. He's like one of the top 25 players, but he's not one of the top 10 or the top 15. That's when these go sideways. This Beal thing fits a lot of the check marks for an extension that somebody will regret 2 years from now. Now, I don't feel like that's a negative comment, right?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I'm sure Beal, like, I would just like to know, like, what's the evidence that he turns your franchise around?
Or even worse, he puts you in like the 7th seed, which is in that no man's land that I don't think anybody wants to be the 7th seed anymore, or the 8th seed, or the play-in team.
But that would be an improvement from who they've been recently. Right. The craziest thing too about Washington is they will have had, if this Beal thing happens, they will have had attachments to 3 of the worst contracts in the league, all within 2 years of each other. Because
then you go backwards. Right. There's even more over the last 25 years.
Sure, but like to have Wall and go, this might be the worst contract in the league. Let's flip it for Westbrook. But you're right. When Westbrook signed that one, there wasn't a ton of like, what the hell's wrong with you? And when the Chris Paul trade was made, that was when people didn't think Chris Paul was going to get another extension like he just did this previous offseason. So at times people thought the Paul deal was going to be worse than the Westbrook deal, even though it was shorter. But Westbrook, you have Westbrook, and the fact that they were able to turn Westbrook into rotation players and get away from a $47 million bill this year for him. But then it's like, hey, should we just do it again, though? Should we go have somebody else be a $50 million bill and have it be 5 straight years? I would love to know what the level of trust there is, too, with Beal. It's like, hey, did you wait this whole time to get your $250 million, if that's what the number comes in at? And then a year from now, you're going to ask out? Because I think a lot of teams would like Beal, but you better have other things in place, because by himself, granted, not great teams, they don't do anything.
Well, I'm not sure they'll like him as much as if he's making like $55 million in year 4 of this deal. That going back to what you said about, who basically, do you have to give him the entire 248, whatever it is? I think it's 248 is the exact number. Who are they bidding against? We know the teams that have cap space. The Pistons, they're going to have money to pay somebody. So are the Spurs. It looks like Orlando will. OKC has the money. They're not going to use it. And then after that, nobody would have the money to compete with them anyway. Even if somebody tries to offload contracts, you just saw how hard that was with the Knicks. Like, they couldn't even get rid of Fournier's deal in the 3 days leading up to the draft. They offered it back to the Celtics just to take it in the exception. The Celtics were like, no thanks. So I just don't know who they're bidding against other than the kind of the threat. They would be like, well, then I'll leave. I'll just go to the Pistons. I just don't think he would do that. He's going to go sideways to another team. So they either have to get that at a lower number, or they have to explore some sign and trade stuff. And the irony is there's probably better sign and trade deals for them than just keeping Beal, right? Like, look at Atlanta. Atlanta is dying to make a 3-for-1. They want nothing more than make a 3-for-1. If Washington could get Collins and Bogdanovich and Okongwu for Beal and pay Collins and Bogdanovich like, I don't know, 30, 36, 37 million a year combined over paying Beal 50, and you get Okongwu, that makes more sense to me than just paying Beal.